We'll come as we go. All right, cool. Well, it's official now. We're live, we're recording, and welcome to Think Again. Thanks again to Jana for hosting us and for you being here. And especially thank you for Sheriff Rosie Rivera for taking time out of her very, very busy schedule to share some thoughts about what's going on the police side, the law enforcement side of the struggles we're having in our culture right now. So very much looking forward to her thoughts. If you have not read her bio, it's useful to do that. Hopefully you have, and some of the materials that I posted ahead of time. So that's on the website. I want to take valuable time to go through that. I have been impressed with Sheriff Rivera's comportment in the media, which I think would be really challenging under stressful conditions or any time. And that's one reason I reached out to her. I had not ever met her or spoken to her before, but was again grateful that she was willing to do this. So I'd kind of like to start out, if it's okay, with you talking a little bit about how you got to where you are, just a little bit of your life story and maybe some of the pivotal things that helped you decide to go into law enforcement and things you've learned along the way. Take it away.
All right. Well, I wanted to be a police officer since I was probably about 7 years old. My father used to watch Perry Mason all the time and insisted that I was going to be the only attorney in the family. And for some reason, I just felt like I had an interest in the detective piece of the Perry Mason. And we talked about that since I was very little. And then growing up, about 14 years old, I became pregnant, a young teenager. And at 15, I became a parent. And my life changed. We had talked about how I was going to go to college, how I was going to become a police officer, and my life changed dramatically because my plans didn't turn out the way that we had planned. At the age of 15, this is back in the 70s, so they didn't have a lot of programs for young women to go to school and have a child. So I did try a young women's program. The problem was I didn't have a vehicle, didn't have a way to get there. It was a long ways away, about 10 miles. I'd have to walk or try to take a bus. That's where I found that life is tough. I was on public assistance. It taught me a lot of lessons, especially when you're sitting in a public assistance building, asking for assistance and getting people looking at you, judging you. I felt like I was being judged all the time, especially when back then they gave you food stamps, not a card. And I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed to use food stamps. You know, I was only 15 years old, and it taught me a lot of lessons. At the time, I ended up marrying the boy that got me pregnant, and he became my husband at the age of 15, and he was 16. So it was tough. We had to work in the onion fields with his family just to support our child, and we both worked hard. That's probably one of the hardest jobs ever, so I have a lot of respect for migrant workers because of that. I didn't come from a family of migrant workers. My father was very educated. He worked at Hill Air Force Base. My mother always worked. We were probably medium class. I wouldn't say made a ton of money, but we owned our own home. And so that was new to me, being a migrant worker and trying to survive, basically. And during that time, I learned a lot of lessons. Number one, I tried to sell Avon at the age of 15. Nobody would buy anything from me because I was too young. And I was just teeny little things. So I'm sure they thought, what is this? But it taught me also that I needed to try to go back to school someday and get an education. And I've been pro education ever since. And when I've raised my children, all three have college degrees because it's so important if you want to, I call it fend for yourself and not depend on others. So as I grew up, about 16 is when I realized that being a police officer was still going to be my goal. We had an incident with some relatives where we went camping, and somebody invited a friend, and the friend wasn't following the rules, and the sheriff's office showed up. And it's the first time I'd ever really experienced, I would call racism in my life, was when I saw how they treated our family, uh, heard what they referred us as, and then when they decided they were going to kick the whole family out of the campground, it took us a while to set up, and grandma, grandpa, aunts, uncles, everybody was kicked out. And I asked my father, well, why don't you speak up and let them know that it's just the one individual? We're happy to, kick that person out. And he said, there's no way I can do that because I will go to jail. And later on, we had the conversation of why wouldn't you stand up for us? And he explained to me that there are some things that you just have to make sure that you do things in his way. It was the right way. In my way, I couldn't understand why he wouldn't stand up for us. And he just said, the way the world is today, you can't do that. I will go to jail. And he knew from experience. I guess he's seen it before. He has never been to jail, but he had seen others go to jail for speaking up. So he told me early on at that time, if you don't like something, change it. And he continued to tell me that for years. And so I always thought about that. And at the age of 16, I wrote a letter to the editor and explained what happened to us at camping and how I felt that it was discrimination. And I just felt like that sheriff's office treated us badly. Just the way that they spoke to my parents and others there. And so I never knew I'd become a sheriff of a sheriff's office. But one thing that I do know is that I would never treat someone that way. And I ask all of our employees, never ever treat somebody like you're better than they are. And years later, I did run into the deputy that we had encountered, several of the deputies, but there was still one that was still working. And then his retirement is where I ran into him. It was really interesting because I remembered his name, but he had no idea who I was. And it was ironic that I happened to be in the same building where his retirement was. It was interesting. And then from there, I just had small jobs, took care of my family, had 2 more children. But at the age of 26, I joined the Navy Reserve. And when I joined the Navy Reserve, I had to have a GED. So I went and got my GED and worked out at Hill Air Force Base. I was on the lawn care crew. I learned how to drive a forklift, drive a dump truck, lay sod. And then later on, I became an electrician on the F-16s. They had worker programs for individuals that, just weren't able to go to college, things like that. So worked as an electrician on the F-16s for a long time. And then at the age of 31 is when I made a decision that it's time to pursue my dream, being a police officer. And I went to the police academy. I was probably one of the older ones too. Most of them joined at 21. and just loved it. Never looked back. I took a huge cut in pay to do it. Um, it's still worth it. And as I started going to the police academy, I was hired right out of the academy at Weber State College. That's where I went to the academy, and that's the police agency that hired me. And I worked there for a year, and then a year later, I came to Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, and that's where my career as a sheriff's deputy started. And now 27 years later, I'm still doing the work, and I still love it every day. So, yeah. That's how I got here.
That's very impressive. Very, very impressive. So how were you able to fund your college? Did you work at the same time, or did you save ahead of time, or did maybe?
Yes, actually, it was Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office that funded my college for me. We
Excellent.
still have to this day a program that helps you pay for your college. And they paid part of my tuition for me, and I was able to, go finish a college bachelor's degree with Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office. And the reason at first I thought, well, I need a degree because I can't get anywhere being in a male-dominated field without a degree. And I always knew how important education was, so that's why I pursued it. And then later on, it really did help me get my foot in the door in the rank area. So I was able to test for sergeant right after I graduated from college, and from then on, my education has helped in many, many ways, and that's why I'm so pro education and encouraging others to make sure you're educated, because it does help you along the way, not just for pay and rank, but also being able to sit at the table and have conversations with people. It's good to have an education background.
I like that. Um, so you talked about that unfortunate and unfair camping experience. So as you've been both in school and in your career, you've probably experienced other times where being a minority has caused you some difficulty?
I wouldn't say being a minority has caused the difficulty, but being a woman, that's where I've felt more discrimination with being a female in a male-dominated field. I haven't really experienced racism since then, but I have seen my granddaughter go through it. My granddaughter is half Black and half Latina, and I see that all the time, even to this day, especially during the climate right now. And so I see it in my family, but not as in policing. I haven't seen that, but as a female, absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, the aspect of being a female, and maybe what particularly white males like myself and others are not seeing or recognizing that we need to recognize better?
Probably recognize that we are capable of doing the job. I'm not saying we do it any better, but we have certain qualities and talents that we can bring to the profession. And that's what we've tried to do for the last 27 years. When I first started in law enforcement, there were only 9 women with the sheriff's office. And, those numbers have increased a ton. We have women in rank. We have many female right now working for us. And what we can just add to what law enforcement has to offer. And, we're not there to compete. And that's what we've tried to explain to people is we're not there to compete. We're there trying to do a job. And sometimes we can do things differently. And, women are very good at DI de-escalation. And that's what we've pushed for a long time, is that if you have a male and a female officer on a call, many times for de-escalation, you would use a female. Many times if you have to find, it just depends on the situation, but there are a lot of qualities that women can bring to the profession. We see that all the time. It's just something that comes with being.
Gosh, having technical difficulties here. Jana, are you noticing that, or is it just me?
I don't know if I lost you.
Yeah, I did for a minute, Lugio, and it sounds like Jana did too.
Okay.
I think, particularly in the times we live in right now, the influence of women in law enforcement could be very critical. So it's you seem to have come in a moment of time that seems very, very important. Have you sensed that yourself? That you've been positioned, you're kind of positioned to be a voice and a leader at a particularly challenging time where your gifts and being a woman can do more probably than someone who was male in your position.
I think that being a female sheriff at this time is very helpful. Now that we have 29 sheriffs in the state of Utah, and I'm the first female that we've ever had. And I think it has helped. I know the other 28 sheriffs have told me that they feel like I did bring something to the table, and they treat me great. They, told me, now you have 28 big brothers, and honestly, they treat me great, like I do, like they are my brothers. And I think we all have something to offer, and as long as you take a look and give people the opportunity, they will show that they do have something to offer. And right now, I have been a voice for female in law enforcement. I'm a founding member of the Utah Women in Law Enforcement, and we formed that group several years ago in order to help women promote, because at the time it was very difficult. And really what we do is build confidence in the women, and help them prepare for the tests, because the tests are very difficult when you're trying to go up the next rank. And sometimes it's helpful to have a friend or somebody, a mentor, somebody that you can go to and have them help you. Not take the test or anything like that, but just build your confidence so you know that you can do the job too. And it's been very helpful. The founding members of that group are all rank in law enforcement right now, and it's been pretty impressive. If you help each other out, communicate and listen to each other, it works really well.
Thank you. What I've often wondered what a typical day is like for someone in law enforcement. Can you kind of walk us through what that would be like?
Sure. So being sheriff is much different than a typical day of a regular patrol officer, simply because of mine is so much administrative. But when I was a patrol officer, the day was so unknown. You walk out your door, and it's same for me too. When we walk out the door, doesn't matter what time, what shift you work, you just don't know when you'll get back, if you will. It's a decision that you have to put in your mind before you even leave for work. When you put that uniform on, it's something that that the job that you're going to do for the day, that you don't know what you're going to run into. You could just have a boring day. You could do traffic stops all day, or you can save a life. You can see a life end. Um, it's just so unpredictable, and every day is that way. Working patrol is one of the hardest jobs because you are the first contact with the public. And if your head isn't in the game, it could cost you your life or somebody else's life. And so we ask our officers, you know, if you are struggling or you're having a bad day, make sure you let a supervisor know, because how important it is to our communities that we have officers who are attentive to their duties. And then, you know, sometimes your shift will go long. If you're on a traffic accident and you're blocking traffic, you could go for hours. And, you know, our families, dinner's never hot. um, it's unpredictable. And sometimes you feel guilty of what your families are going through, especially what's going on right now with the civil unrest. It's extremely difficult. Your families wonder if you're going to come home, and you know it's interesting for me because my day during the protests in Salt Lake City, when I left my house, I told my daughter, "Don't worry about me. I'll be fine because I won't be in the front line." Because typically I'm making the decisions and I'm not at the front line. A couple hours later, she's watching the news and there her mom is on the front line. It was very difficult for her. It wasn't difficult for me. I felt very comfortable and not in any danger. But I did realize the impact on the families of law enforcement. Every officer there, we felt confident in what we were doing, but our families were sitting home worried sick about us. And after that event, we've had many officers talk to us about it and how their families felt. And so it's really hard to tell you what a day of a police officer is like, because you just don't know. You never know how it's going to turn out.
Well, that in itself says a lot right there. And that would be difficult for a lot of people, I think, to manage, is that changeability, I guess. I would think that you would have to be somewhat kind of on high alert most of the time because of what you're doing. You never know the intent of the person that you're interacting with and maybe what's happened right before you arrive. Is that true?
That is true. You are on high alert the entire time you're at work and off duty. So even off duty, police officers tend to stay on that high alert. I think that contributes to a lot of the stress that officers go through and the shorter lifespan, because you're always in that high alert mode. And especially now, and like in a position like mine, I'm always on high alert. I have to be, especially being on the news and being known to people. I don't know if someone is going to come up to me and want to shake my hand or you know, do something else to me. And it happens all the time. You just have to make sure that you're on alert. And, you know, we train for that. We know what we got into when we signed up for the job. But things have changed a lot. You know, if you stay on that high alert for too long, I know a lot of the officers have some issues with their mental health. And so we have really worked hard on wellness programs for the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office and the Unified Police Department. Both have some really good wellness programs for officers for that reason.
That's good to hear. What do you encourage on their personal time, and what programs do you offer to help with that high alert and the stress? What kind of things are recommended that they do? And is there some follow-up to help make sure they do those things, that they take care of themselves? And even for their families, are there things for their families to deal with the stress that they have worrying about their loved ones?
Yeah, we offer counseling for the officer and the officer's family. But one of the things we do is it's like a brotherhood with law enforcement. Many mentor each other, but at the same time, they're also there when uh, one of their brothers or sisters needs somebody to talk to. We have a lot of peer support programs, uh, and many of the officers will tell you that they work really hard on their time off to not uh, continue to associate with too many police officers, so they don't make too many friends within the organization and do off-duty things with police, because you tend to just talk about police stuff. So many of the officers who don't struggle as much tend to spend more time with the family, but doing family things and not watching the news all the time, not, going to the range and shooting their firearms or practicing and training off duty as well. That seems to help because when you're a young officer, especially when you're a young officer, you tend to overdo it, train and train and train, and it becomes your life. And you start using police lingo even with your families. We've all done it. My kids grew up knowing all of the police lingo because that's what you tend to do. And we advise you to try not to do that, but we know it's going to happen. But more so, it's more of the peer support that we offer each other, and then the counseling for officers and their families. That helps.
Okay, thank you. What, given what has been suggested in different parts of the country in terms of, all the way from the extreme of defunding police to taking the things that police are called upon to do and giving those to social agencies, what are you seeing? And I mean, if you were queen of the world right now in terms of policing, what would you think would be best? What would you recommend?
I would recommend not defunding the police department, but making sure the money goes to training. Training is so important. And uh, right now, there are many law enforcement agencies who have struggled with training because of funding. There just isn't enough free training out there. And if it is, it's probably not quality training. We need a lot more training in mental health area. I know that with the UPD, we have been in discussions on how can we add more mental health training to our training curriculum, because we have so many mental health cases right now. UPD, I believe, is probably the only agency in Salt Lake County that has a mental health unit, and that has a sergeant and a detective and a therapist that go on calls. I know Salt Lake City has something similar, but that unit is very helpful to law enforcement and to the community, because the community is suffering uh, as well. And I think that it's, rather than defund, we need just more training, more defined training, and offer it to all agencies, because we should be all on the same page. What happens right now in law enforcement, everybody has their different curriculums and they train differently. There are some things that they train the same on, a lot of tactics, things like that. But if you go to different police agencies, they will tell you they all have different programs on how to deal with the mentally ill, how to deal with drug addiction, and simple people in crisis. And that would require, de-escalation, bias training, mental health training, all those kind of things. If they focus on funding those, I think that we could really improve law enforcement in a big way.
Okay, thank you. one of our attendees has a question.
Okay.
What is the difference between sheriff and police?
Well, the sheriffs are elected officials. They work for the people. Police chiefs are usually appointed by their mayors. The only difference between the two are probably that political piece. Most sheriff's offices run jails and court security, and they have a law enforcement piece to it. The Salt Lake County Sheriff is unique in the state of Utah and really across the country, because the Salt Lake County Sheriff runs Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, which is the jail and the court security, but also the Salt Lake County Sheriff is the CEO over Unified Police Department, which is a law enforcement agency. So that is a unique piece. We haven't been able to find any other agency or agencies that do that, where the sheriff runs two separate organizations, two separate budgets, and they answer to a UPD board, and then with the sheriff as elected official answer to the people. So it's very unique, but not a lot of difference. We're all law enforcement officers. We all think of each other as brothers and sisters, but it is that political piece that's different.
Okay. So in terms of answering to the people, is that kind of first line the mayors of cities that are in the Salt Lake County? Is that?
Yep, mayors, the council, citizens, because if you don't answer to the people, they don't elect you again. So you're held to a higher standard in a way, because you have to ensure that you are communicating and listening to the communities that you serve, or they just won't keep you in your position. And, you know, that happens a lot. And I think every sheriff in the state of Utah understands that. So they work really hard for the people in their communities.
Thank you. So Annie, I might need you to speak up. I'm not sure I understand your second question about the ratio. So feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was just curious when she was talking, when, by the way, we voted for you, Sheriff.
Oh, thanks.
I was curious when you were talking about the ratio of male to female officers. How could you describe, in Salt Lake at least, what the ratio is between men and women lawbreakers or violators of the law? Do you deal with many women, I guess, is really my first question.
Yes, we do. I don't have the exact numbers, but for Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office, we have what's called a jail dashboard, and it's available to the public. And it will tell you how many females are booked in jail, how many males. And there really are more males, but we have seen an increase in females in the last couple of years. Now with COVID, not quite as many females, because what we're doing is trying to keep our capacity low, so we don't have any COVID cases in our facility. And typically females do more crime on the lower level, such as a misdemeanor or felony 3s. And so they would be who ends up getting released early or on pre-trial or bail out. But yeah, it's definitely more males. You know, if you have an opportunity to take a look at our jail dashboard, it's great information, a lot of data that we're providing. And we're trying to figure out how to improve that as well, to add more data without releasing, you know, people's names. But it talks about ethnicity, what crimes they are booked in on. It's a very helpful tool for the communities and for me.
Thank you. Good question. Yeah, Dan, submit questions to the chat if you would. Thank you. So how has, there's kind of two questions I have. Let's deal with the protest, how that has changed pre-protests and what was going on and what's been going on. And then also COVID, how those two things have impacted you and the department and how you approach your work.
I think with pre-protest, police were able to do their jobs without having to watch their back constantly. I mean, we've always been prepared, but now even myself, as I leave our building, I have to make sure that, you know, there is nobody there waiting around the corner. We've had to take our signage down where it used to be parking, you know, here's the sheriff parks here, the undersheriff parks here, all of that we had to take away because we're now targets. So it has changed a lot, and also the conversations that we have changed. I think the protests have been good. I mean, I truly believe a good thing. Not the violence, but the protesting is a good thing. It brings to light issues that some people tend to not want to talk about, and it has brought to light for law enforcement to take a second look at what we're doing and how can we fix what's broken, if it's broken, what areas we feel like it's broken. And how we do that is we listen to our communities. Our communities are telling us that what we're doing isn't working, and we have to take a different look at it. I know for Unified Police Department and the Sheriff's Office, prior to this, we didn't have our policies online. We now have our policies online so the community can know what our policies and procedures are. Our training's listed online. We are taking a look at our training. And I think what's happened in the past is we train and we tend to train again on the same things. But when something comes to light like it has, it really makes you focus on, okay, where are you lacking in that training? We have to do something different because it's not working. Those things have come out of the protests, but also what has come out of the protests is the fact that we realize how dangerous our jobs really are. And I can see myself going into the dark because I should have turned my light on and I didn't.
You can go ahead and
So it looked really, okay, I'm going to leave for 1 second and turn it on.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm back. I noticed it was getting darker and darker.
Yeah, you were getting more digitized.
Yeah, so this is much better. And then the other question was COVID, correct?
Yeah. How has that changed what you've had to do and your stress and concerns?
COVID has really changed us quite a bit, more so in the jail. So in the jail, we were able to jump on prevention pretty quick, and that's probably why we don't have any COVID cases currently. We've had about 30 since COVID started, but it changed the way that we do things, and you know, it brought to light having a jail. You're in close contact with a lot of people. And before, you know, the flu would pass through, or you would get various illnesses going through the jail, but we've never had a pandemic. And what it showed us is that there are things that we can do better to ensure that the individuals that are in our facility are taken care of, and we can take more precautions. What it has shown as well is how important our medical staff is to our facility. So we have a very large medical staff. We have over 50 nurses, we have doctors, we have a psychiatrist in our jail. And it just goes to show you how important the role they play. Also, we have found that we've reduced the number of individuals who are in our facility to keep our numbers low. I think what it shows is that some of those individuals that we released probably don't need to be in jail. There should be alternatives for them. And I think that it helps the community realize that we need a crisis receiving center or some other alternatives and resources for individuals to go to rather than just use the jail as a place to send people. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about mental health, drug addiction, various addictions. We need more detox centers, more help for those type of individuals that really jail isn't doing them a whole lot of good. One thing that we have found, we've had to cancel our programs, and because of COVID, to reduce our numbers. And we're seeing how important those programs were to people. We're having people reach back out and talk about how important they were to them. And they really do help. We teach life skills. Some people can get their GED in there. There's a lot of drug addiction, alcohol help. So there's a lot of lessons that we've learned from COVID. On the UPD side, what we have learned is that our patrol officers, the precautions that we normally would take, we were doing it right all along, because we haven't had much issues with the patrol officers. And I think it's just because the way that we have always trained that you take those precautions. And so we haven't, I think across the country, you don't see very many patrol officers who have contracted COVID, but you do see a lot of jail staff and jail corrections officers. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
Interesting. You have partially, I'm not sure if you're, because you can see a chat or not, but you partially answered one of the big questions.
Yeah, no, I don't have the chat up, but.
Okay, that's fine. Dan Eastman was asking about, we have such a high rate of incarceration in this country, higher than anywhere else. And so you've kind of touched on, some things that we could do. People that are going to jail that probably should be somewhere else to assist them. Any other thoughts on that, our high incarceration rate, and what else can be done to not have that as such a problem?
I think that, one thing that we've been looking at since I've been sheriff is bail. There are individuals who are in our facility who can't afford bail, so they stay in there. And it's about $100 a day. That's what it costs us to house somebody in our facility. So if your bail is $2,500, in 25 days you would reach that. If you can't afford bail, you could stay in there even longer, and it costs, the jail and the county more money to have you stay in jail. It would be cheaper for us to pay the bail. Now, I don't believe everybody should be able to bail out. Violent crimes, I'm all for. That's why we have a jail, when we should have jail beds for those violent offenders. But there are some people, just because of their financial status, they end up staying in jail longer.
Thank you.
No, I've heard that some people have had to get arrested and go to jail. For instance, if they need to get into a detox program, that they can get that while they're incarcerated, but they couldn't get it, given they had no means on the street. Is that true? Is that something that goes on?
Yeah, it does. I mean, if you get booked in jail, there are resources that we offer to help you be able to get into different programs. So I can see where some people would feel like, maybe it's better if I go to jail, and then you can detox in jail. What we encourage law enforcement now to do, rather than bring them to jail, because jail really isn't a detox center, but we are set up for people to detox. We ask them to try taking them to a detox center first. And that's why we're pushing the crisis receiving center, because a crisis receiving center, law enforcement can take any individual, whether it's mental health, drug addiction, if they're on alcohol, whatever it is, and they will identify at that center where they really need to be. And, you know, if they commit a crime and it's a violent crime, then they would end up in jail anyway. But yeah, I have seen that before.
So, Sheriff, is there a model of that out there in the country that's got a great center that's working, that you're describing, that you're trying to advocate for?
Yeah, Mesa, Arizona, Phoenix has one. Actually, Phoenix, I believe they have 4 crisis receiving centers. And I know Salt Lake County just got funding for a receiving center. I think it's still a couple of years out, though, before it's built.
Good. I think that's a great approach. Jana's got a question or two here. So what do you wish were part of the public discourse around police-involved shootings? Are there important things we are not discussing?
You broke up on part of it. I heard, what do you wish for, I think, is what I heard.
That were part of the public discourse around police-involved shootings. Are there important things we are not discussing?
Gosh, you know, that's such a tough topic. There's a lot of things that I think a better understanding of law enforcement would help, and if law enforcement would communicate better. As you know, the body cameras are very useful to law enforcement, but not all law enforcement agencies have them. And I think that we have to continue the conversation, because we have had a lot of officer involved shootings in the last 3 years. And as we in law enforcement see, it's increasing. And we're noticing that we have more and more individuals who won't comply, even at simple commands. There's a lot of individuals who flee. We need to continue having conversations, because we don't want the shootings to occur either. That is probably one of the toughest things for law enforcement to go through, is when they go through an officer involved shooting. You don't leave your house for your shift thinking, oh yes, I'm just going to go out and shoot somebody today. What you think is, I hope I never have to. And it seems like it has increased in the last 3 years. And we talk about it. We're not so sure it's going to stop, because there's a lot of violence out there right now, a lot of resistance to law enforcement. But we also talk about how we can do better to improve our interactions with the community, how we can listen better, how we can get better trained in dealing with people in crisis. And, it's really opened up the conversation for sure.
It strikes me that if we had these crisis centers, people that are kind of in crisis, whether it's addiction or whatever, that might take care of a certain amount of the population not being so resistant. That if they know that the cops are going to take them to some help, like Dan said, maybe to get some, to dry out and get some addiction help, that they know that instead of jail, they're actually going to go to a crisis center and get the help they need. It seems like that could be a component of it, from what you're suggesting. What do you think's driving this more resistance to simple orders and obeying the cops and stuff? What do you think's going on there?
I think there's just a lack of respect for the profession now. And I don't know what's driving it. And I don't know if we're ever going to be able to change it. We hope we can. I think that what I wish is that when an officer does something, that is unethical, that they don't blame all officers, because we all get blamed for an incident. And there are many times that we don't agree with what occurred, and we would not stand by that person. We try to weed out the bad, but it is tough when you get blamed as a whole profession for something. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that racism does exist, and there are issues, and we do need more training. So it kind of goes both ways. And sometimes you'll find that law enforcement becomes defensive of itself. So it's harder to get people to admit some of that does occur. But being a person of color, I've seen it myself. So I know that it occurs. We just have to be better at what we're doing, and continue to train. And hopefully the trust with the community will come back. There really is a lack of trust. And then, if they took a look at the officer-involved shootings, you will find that some of the individuals will tell us, "I'm not going back to prison," or their outlook on life to them is dire. So they choose suicide by cop. We've had several in the last few years that way. And that's really a hard one to deal with, because the person, their intent is that an officer take their life for them because they don't want to do it themselves. But they don't realize the impact on the officer's family, on the organization, and on the profession. So.
Is there any, I'm sure there's got to be somebody and people working on the technology aspect of controlling people without, I mean, there's tasers, but they don't seem to be used that much. Some methods that will work better than just shooting people with guns. Are you aware of things that are going on out there to help with that eventually? Or?
Yeah, there's a lot of studies going on. There are some tools that we have right now, like 40 millimeter. It's like a beanbag type system that you would hit somebody with a beanbag at a high pressure versus a bullet. And we do use those with Unified Police Department. We have had to use those rather than taking somebody's life. But sometimes the distance, it depends on the distance of the individual, what type of firearm they are using, or, a lot of people don't realize how dangerous a knife is. But within seconds, somebody could actually take an officer's life with a knife. And we train on that as well, but you never bring an alternative tool to use if somebody has a knife. You almost have to have a firearm if you're going to win in that type of a battle. Hopefully, though, we learn more on how to communicate with people and de-escalate. We do have tasers. They're not always effective. If the person has heavy clothing, it's not going to work. We used to carry a stick all the time, and then we had the Rodney King incident, and the police departments got away from using the stick. So there's different things. We can use OC spray, which has been very effective. When I first started in law enforcement, that's almost all we had. It's effective, but not for very long. And sometimes you spray, the officer can go down as well. So there are things that we are looking at, but we also have to understand that there is always going to be tools out there for us to use and new technology, but we have to be very careful that it is been tested, because you would never want to hurt an individual on new technology, just because you're trying to find alternatives. I know that people have asked also, why do we always kill people when we do officer-involved shootings? We don't train to kill people. What we train is to take out the threat. And many times that is what is going to happen when you're taking out a threat if someone has a firearm. I think that training, we just have to continue working on those de-escalation, the communication, and finding alternatives. Many of the people will suffer from mental health issues that we're dealing with officer-involved shootings. And sometimes the family members will come back and say, well, yes, they were suffering from mental health issues. And that would be good to know up front who we're dealing with. So that's why our mental health unit has been so effective in helping us de-escalate. But all officers should be learning de-escalation techniques, definitely.
Let's see. Thank you. A lot of great questions and answers. So Ron was asking, do you think it is in the public's best interest for public employees like law enforcement to have a union? Does having a police union ultimately serve the public interest?
I think if it depends, because we're not a, why am I drawing a blank here? We don't negotiate contracts. That's what unions typically do in other states, is negotiate contracts. But in the state of Utah, we don't do that. So what the unions that are in law enforcement in the state of Utah typically support law enforcement in getting better benefits, getting raises, providing training. Like the Fraternal Order of Police in the state of Utah pays for officers to be trained. The association that the Unified Police Department has, that association does help officers when they're in need or on their discipline or training. So I do think the unions are good to have, but they're quite different than a state where the union is there to help negotiate contracts. But we just don't do that here in the state of Utah.
Okay, thank you. Alan says he's a fan of both law enforcement and people of color, and I realize that both sides are suffering. It appears people react strongly when there are many shots fired, sometimes emptying the magazines into someone. To us untrained, that seems more like panic or fear, or I would add maybe unnecessary aggression. How do you help us understand those situations better?
Some of the things that we've done is, so we have what's called a Virtra, and it's a machine that we go train on, and it puts you in scenarios, it's a virtual scenario, and we've taken citizens in there to show them that the decisions that law enforcement makes are a split-second decision, and usually you fall back on the training that you've had. And what we do train to shoot a firearm, so and it's also, we train to take out a threat. So as long as that threat exists, that you would continue to fire. It's hard for a general public to understand that. And that's why we offer the Virtra for, various groups to come and take a look at it, see what we're training. We put our Citizens Academy, we put individuals in that exact same scenario and let them see how difficult it is to make that split-second decision. And it's been helpful. We have a Citizens Advisory Board that we also, they train on that too, so they can understand it and then go out to the community and explain it to the community. But a lot of, really the officers fall back on what they've been trained.
Which is why you're talking about training as being so important.
Right, right.
Talk to us
And then there was a comment on law enforcement and people of color.
Yeah. Well, he was just saying, he has sympathy for both sides. The people who are protesting.
And so do I.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do I. And I don't think all the protesters are all people of color. I think one thing I can tell you that in law enforcement, diversity is a challenge. And 3 years ago, one of my goals was to try to increase the diversity within the sheriff's office. And we are now 27% diverse. We have several different ethnicities that work for the sheriff's office, and it seems to have helped lower our use of forces. And so we haven't done enough study on that yet, but we do know our use of forces complaints have gone down. And that's, something that I'm not sure if it's linked or not, but that's just a fact. And for the Unified Police Department, we're working really hard to add diversity into the police department. The challenge there is people don't want to be a police officer anymore. So we're having a challenge of hiring anyone. So we can't pick and choose who we hire. It's been very difficult.
Yeah, I imagine it is. Can you describe how the relationship works with like the Salt Lake City Police or other city police forces and the Unified Police Force? How you as a sheriff of the Unified and then the jail, you're also running the jail, which I assume maybe some of the cities use, or they have their own jails. Can you kind of delineate all that, how that all works and the relationship between those?
Yeah, we're the largest jail in the state of Utah, and we're the only jail in Salt Lake County. So everybody, all the agencies, law enforcement agencies in Salt Lake County would use Salt Lake County Jail. We have a very good relationship with all of the law enforcement agencies, including the feds. So the marshal's office, the DEA, the FBI, we have a great relationship with all of them. So one of the things that we do is we meet monthly. We also meet monthly with the district attorney's office. So we meet monthly with all of the police chiefs. I meet monthly with all the sheriffs. So there's a lot of conversation that goes on, and we're trying to keep things consistent within each department. The challenge we have in law enforcement is every agency is governed by a body. And usually with UPD, it's a governing board, but most of the cities, it's their mayor and their councils. And every election, it changes and you get new people with new ideas. So you're constantly trying to educate. And it is a challenge to educate that many people. An example is Unified Police Department is governed by a governing board of 12 people. Those 12 people are made up of mayors and townships. So when you add all of the mayors and all of the mayors' councils, you're talking probably 80 people that you answer to for the UPD board. And within those 80 people, every 2 years, people come up for election and they change out. So that is a challenge in trying to educate over and over what law enforcement is about, how your budgets work, what are your priorities, what we train. It just becomes a big challenge. But law enforcement as a whole, we all get along really well. We have a mutual aid agreement. So like when Salt Lake City had the protests and they called for help, the mutual aid agreement, all the agencies automatically go to assist. And it seems to work well that way. What we have found with the protests in Salt Lake, though, some of the agencies are on a small budget, and it was very, very costly to go assist another agency. Unified Police Department spent an enormous amount of money paying officers to go help Salt Lake for 2 weeks with protests. And that was something that we learned since, that we need to make sure there's money in the budget. Fortunately, it was towards the end of the year budget, so we were okay. But if it were to happen in the beginning of a budget year, by the end of the year, we could have been out of funds for protests. So that's something that we learned from the Salt Lake City protests.
So if you don't have funds, what would happen? if there's no funds to aid a city?
We would just go to the board and, yeah, we just go to the board and ask for a budget adjustment, or if it's a city, you would just go to your council and ask for a budget adjustment. But as a leader of an organization, that's one of the last things you really want to do, is say, I've overspent my budget. Budgets are really important to people, and so you try not to overspend. But that would be a good excuse if you had to use one.
What are some things that you, or I'm assuming you're kind of observing what's going on in Seattle and Portland. What are some things, observations that you're coming, or conclusions or thoughts about what's going on there and how it might apply here for the youth force?
My thoughts on that is it's totally out of control, and they need to get control back. I would hope that here in Utah that we would, you know, I think with what happened in Salt Lake was a good lesson for us to learn that if you allow people to break the law, they take advantage of that, and will believe that they can continue doing that. And it, you know, early on, I think if there were more conversations with the groups that have a message, would have been helpful. And what's happened in Seattle and Portland, the message that individuals want to send isn't being heard anymore. What's being heard is lawlessness, that they're just going out and committing crime and being vigilantes, especially when they're bordering up a police station and setting it on fire, knowing that there's law enforcement inside. That's just very sad for society in itself. And that's why I hope in the state of Utah we would ensure that, you know, we're well trained, and we send the message that we cannot allow that, and the message that you want us to hear won't be heard, because there is an important message when you're talking about racism and fairness and, you know, officers' use of force. There's a message there, and we have to listen to the message, but you can't hear it when people are trying to, you know, turn it all into a violent conversation.
Thank you. So what are your thoughts when something happens like Floyd in this last shooting, the man with the 3 kids? I mean, I imagine if I were a law officer, I'd go, oh, please, not again. What do you do to kind of gear up when that happens? And what could the public be doing? Or it would seem like maybe even our legislature, maybe they ought to be called into session, an emergency session, the minute something like that happens, and protesters invited to come and sit at the Capitol and talk to them or something. I don't know. But what can we do differently than we're doing when those horrible incidences happen of, you know, unnecessary force or racial discrimination by law officers? What are you doing and your officers doing when they hear on the radio, this has happened again?
Right, and it is again and again. We do think that as well, especially in a situation like the Floyd case. You know, I think even officers wanted to judge immediately, and there wasn't a lot of information being provided, but we saw for our own eyes what happened, and that was pretty devastating to even law enforcement. I don't know anybody that would agree that that was okay. Other officer involved shootings, I know with law enforcement, we talk about, you know, what is a person's perception right up front without having all of the information. And I think it comes from, we know with body cameras they're important, but if they're at a different angle, it could show a different story. And we've seen that before with body cameras when surveillance video is provided, or there's always, all the facts aren't there, and we're a fact gathering profession. So I think that's what we do best, is probably sit back and say, we need to see all the facts before we start making judgments. However, with the Floyd case, it was so apparent right in front of our eyes. You just have to say that's unacceptable, and things have to change. And, I don't know any law enforcement agency in Utah that was using chokeholds. I know we don't use them, and all the police chiefs have talked. So that was something that was a little different, because it was right in front of your eyes. Typically, with an officer-involved shooting, there's body camera, and people are going to react immediately to whatever the body camera is. But with law enforcement, we know there's always another story behind it. And I think we tend to wait to see what the rest of the information is being provided. I can tell you, though, that it's been very interesting with speaking with officers when there is an officer-involved shooting. There is a fear that, and a question that is asked immediately, if it's a person of color. And that concerns me, because we shouldn't be concerned about that. We should be concerned about the incident that occurred. It doesn't matter whether the person's a person of color or not. But that's a natural reaction to what's occurring right now. And media tend to cover officer-involved shootings involving persons of color, but there are a lot more officer-involved shootings out there. And so it's been a challenge to try to remain positive about what you do as a law enforcement officer on a daily basis when you see other officers who shouldn't be in the profession at all, and you have no control over it. What we're doing in our agency is, and we have done it for a long time, we track all of our use of forces, and we hold people accountable. And that sometimes is a hard thing to do, to hold people accountable, but we do, and they know it. And I think documenting your use of forces, holding people accountable, and issuing discipline if needed tends to send this culture that it's not acceptable. Inappropriate behavior, unethical behavior isn't acceptable, and I think that helps. But at the same time, we don't want officers to fear that if they do get involved in an officer-involved shooting, I don't want them to go on an incident and not protect themselves because they're fearful of being charged in those incidents as well. So it's just such a complicated topic.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, as voting citizens, what are things that we can do to help both sides that you see, the systemic racism that occurs, and also to make it possible for you to hire more and better quality people on your force, to have these intake centers that are not jails exist, all the things that might helpful. What are things that we can be doing to help that become better, to help the situation be better than it is?
I think understanding both sides and listening. People are communicating the issues. If you disregard all of the violence that's going on, there is a message there. And I think if the general public understood that people of color do have a message, and they're trying to get that message out. Some people do it in the wrong way. But at the same time, understand what law enforcement does and why we do it. It is a split-second decision when you take a life, and no officer that I know looks forward to that ever in their career. And I hope the general public would understand. And really what it is communicating and understanding what the profession is about, and understanding that we are people too. We're just, I know we had this conversation before we started the recording about, grandchildren and kids, and we're just people too. Every officer is a person, and we're doing the best that we can. And we are open to conversation, we're open to listening, and we want to hear what our communities are saying to us. But at the same time, we need you to listen to us too.
So if we want to communicate with you, what's the best way to do that? With the department?
With the department, typically you would either contact the department website, or you can contact me. People contact me every single day. You'd be surprised how many emails I get. And usually I'll forward them to whoever I think can answer their questions the best. We try to do town halls. We were doing town halls before the protests and before COVID. But right now we're doing online town halls. Myself and Mayor Wilson have teamed up to do some town halls just to listen. They're more listening town halls to address some of the issues that people have. And you could join a Citizens Academy, or attend a Citizens Academy, become part of the Citizens Advisory Board. There's another group called Honorary Colonels who work with the Sheriff's Office and the Unified Police Department. And we do training once a month with the colonels, and they're more of a supportive group for us. They support us and we support them. But the important piece of all of that is everybody that gets educated on law enforcement can go back out to the community and become a voice for us. And then they hear the community and they come back and they're a voice for the community, and they bring that back to us. So that's a big important piece.
So how do we find those things that you just mentioned? Are they on your website, the sheriff's website, or?
Yeah, on our website, it will talk about how you can apply, how you, for the Citizens Academy, how you can sign up. And with the Citizens Academy right now, because of COVID, we're not having it, but we do have 2 or 3 Citizens Academies a year. And so other agencies also do as well. I know even the FBI does a Citizens Academy. So there's a lot of police agencies that want to show the community what it is we do and why we respond the way we respond on incidents. And that is very helpful.
And thank you. In terms of trying to get a hold of, or not get a hold of, but advocate for these intake centers with the legislature and such, are there certain people we should be focusing on in the legislature? Or, I mean, are there some bills out there we should be focusing on? Is there also volunteering that can be done right now with COVID at the jail? Or what are some of those other things that could be done?
Yeah, with the volunteers at the jail, we've had to reduce our volunteers because of COVID. But prior to COVID, we had almost 600 volunteers within our agency. So that's a lot of people that come in and help. Legislator-wise, I'm not sure. I haven't seen any bills on the crisis receiving centers yet. But if you reach out to Mayor Wilson and give her your support on that, that would be very helpful. Because I really think that's going to change the dynamic of what's going on right now with individuals who are incarcerated, and it will help local law enforcement. If you think about one officer comes on shift and deals with one individual, it could take 2, 3, 4 hours. And on a Friday night at the jail, when everybody's booking in, it's a 4-hour wait. Some of those individuals could already go through a crisis receiving center and get the help they need or get referred to where they need to be. And that could put that police officer back on the street doing proactive work versus reactive.
Okay. Thank you. There's a question, what is learned in a Citizens Academy? What do you guys teach?
A Citizens Academy, what we do is we put you through several scenarios. So we first start off by introducing you to the organization. We will show you what the detectives do, what the patrol officers do, what canine, what SWAT. You get to go up to the range. You do the virtual training. You get to do a jail tour. Go to the courts and see what the court security does. And then we also teach you how to do a traffic stop, put you in a scenario of an officer who has to stop a vehicle. We will have a scenario like a burglary in progress, and you have a fake gun and a flashlight, and just like if you were a police officer and you were responding, we put you in those situations so you can understand how quick an officer has to make a split-second decision. And it's people who have gone through the academy, they don't want to leave the last day. They want to stay and they want to continue. And we have academy graduations, and some of them even ask if they can come back at a later time to redo it. It's a lot of fun to do, but at the end of the day, what it does is educate the community on what law enforcement does and why we do it.
Thank you. Do you think going forward, it'll have a component of how to de-escalate conflicts? Seems like that would be valuable.
Yes, and part of our academy you learn that anyway, because the virtual training is super effective, because they put you in a scenario where someone may have what looks like a firearm, or somebody that's unstable at the time in a crisis, and you have to react to that. Somebody who isn't trained may end up shooting the person in the scenario, where a law enforcement officer that's trained would already know, that they wouldn't shoot them. We put them in a scenario where there's a hostage situation, why you would not shoot, don't shoot situations. School shootings is another scenario that we practice on. And it's just so the community can see what we do and how quickly life changes.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier a citizen advisory board. How does that work?
Mm-hmm.
What's their purpose? What do they do?
Their purpose is, for the Sheriff's Office, the Citizens Advisory Board has been around probably 30 years. They are a supportive group of the Sheriff's Office and the Unified Police Department. They sit on our various boards, subcommittees. They do come to some of the staff meetings. They also, what is called a major incident review. So if we have a major incident, such as, it could be any type of major incident where an officer uses force, or it could be an officer involved shooting, it could be suicide at the jail. They sit in on those reviews, and their input matters in those reviews. They go over, they don't do discipline, but they do talk about how we could do things better, if there's something in our policies that need to be changed, if we need to change our training. They take a look at that, and it's really good to get the community's input, and that they're just members of the community, and they bring a lot of knowledge, and we use them as our resource. They also work in our special events. So I'll use Milk Creek as an example. When Milk Creek has their 4th of July event, they will work booths right along with law enforcement, educating the community on what we do. And they also help with the Citizens Academy. We couldn't do the Citizens Academy without their help, because they are volunteers, and they do the scenarios for us, that kind of stuff. So it's been very beneficial to have our Citizens Advisory Board, and that's been in place for years.
Thank you. Well, we've used up our time. There's a comment from Alan Jones to everyone. It says, please offer our profound thanks for the sheriff's time with us tonight and all she does for our community every day. This has been very enlightening. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with? One final thought?
I think so. I want to tell you a little bit of a story.
Okay.
And I'll do it really quick because I know everybody probably hungry. So,
Well, you're the one that probably needs to get to your family.
so with the jail, once a year, our religious organizations and our chaplains host an event, and it's faith-based. And we had one event where there was an individual that had so you've probably all heard of the thin blue line. An individual had a cross with thin blue line to support law enforcement. And I started talking to him, and it was a beautiful cross. Anyway, he gave me that cross, and I hung it on my visor in my police truck. And this is 3 years ago. It's still hanging there. But it was a reminder to me every day that you have to have faith. You have to have faith in God that He is going to watch over us every day. And it reminded me that it's okay as a law enforcement officer to believe and have faith every day. And it was very, very heartwarming, touching to me that somebody would hand over something that meant so much to them. And now it means so much to me. And I know that that group did a story on it in their newsletter, and it went a long way just to show you how much one person's impact can be on another when it involves faith. And I think that my faith is what keeps me going every day, and I know that it's going to continue to keep me going for as long as I'm sheriff and even longer. But in order to do a job like mine, I have to rely on faith. So I think that's important for everybody to understand that.
Well, thank you. It's been so good to be with you tonight. We appreciate, again, you taking the time out of a very, very busy schedule. It's been fun to get to know you better and understand what you do and what your officers do. And we appreciate it very much. So thank you. Is anybody else you can unmute if you'd like, the rest of you, and if you have something you want to share real quick or say thanks, go ahead. Anybody else want to say anything before we leave tonight? All right, I see some more thank yous in the.
Just a lot of thank yous from all of us. From us at our house,
Thank
anyway.
you.
Enlightening.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you.
You bet.
Yeah, I learned some important things, a new perspective.
Thank you, Dan.
Wish we could clone you around the country.
That would be good. That would be good.
Well, thank you.
Thanks to
Appreciate
all of
that.
you for participating tonight. Appreciate you being here and your friendship and supporting this evening. Thanks, Jana, again for hosting.
And thanks, Jay.
You bet.
Very
We'll see you next month.
Okay.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday, Jay.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
We'll
you.
see ya.
Good night,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye. Jana, you'll save the chat too and everything? Okay. Thank you so much. Good night, all. Take care.